The session before lunch, and no pressure, the session before lunch is a guest keynote, storytelling, digital revolution, motivational storytelling to accelerate business transformation. You're never going to kill storytelling because it's built in the human plan. We come with it. Margaret Atwood, author of The Handmaid's Tale. This next keynote represents a company that is known for creating some of the greatest brand stories that the world has ever known. Please join me in welcoming on stage Yuri Aguiar, Chief Innovation and Transformation Officer, Ogilvy. He's a rock musician and has been one for years, and he plays the drums. Sorry we don't have a drum kit here, but we would have loved to have you perform. He's a biker with a Harley Davidson, but he has no tattoos and no beer belly to prove it. And he's an aviation enthusiast. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Yuri, the Chief Information and Transformation Officer. And before that, he was a Strategic Portfolio Director on the leadership team at WPP Core Tech. So it doesn't get better than this, the storytelling session. Yuri, the stage is all yours.
That's my Photoshop image up there. Can we get the screen up? So in 1939, Alan Turing cracked the Enigma code in about 6 months. Prime Minister Winston Churchill called it one of the greatest contributions to the Allies winning World War II. What many people don't realize is that Alan Turing worked with electromechanical technology. You fast forward 30 years to 1969, and NASA lands a man on the moon. It was President John F. Kennedy in 1962 who said they would land a man on the moon within the decade, and that happened. What many people don't realize is that the Apollo 11 rocket that took the men to the moon had a guidance computer that could only handle about 8 transactions at a time. Fast forward 50 years to 2019, and my cell phone can do 5 billion transactions per second. I haven't tried it, but in theory it can. So why then did a McKinsey study and a Harvard Business Review study last year indicate that less than 30% of digital transformations are successful? We know that the technology works. We know we've moved significantly along the journey from the time of Alan Turing to now. Clearly, there is something else going on. And in my theory, I call it the 3 C's: communication, change management, and culture. Today, I will focus on the communication side and the storytelling side a little bit. And maybe I'll touch upon culture and change management as well. But since I'm the last speaker before lunch, I'm going to give you a 20% discount. Rather than do 10 lessons, I'm going to do just 8. Okay? Give you a break. Before I go down into the stories, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because over my 25-year or so career, I've had many experiences across 3 continents, working on 3 continents. And I just want to share with you some of the stories that I've learned, and I'm sure you have some, and I'm sure I can learn from you as well. But I hope this is helpful. So you need to understand a little bit about my background before I go into it. So the way I introduce myself is this. This is the Dow Jones Industrial Average from 2003 to 2013. I had the absolute pleasure of getting my first global CIO role right here. The stock market was 2/3 of the way down, 1/3 to go. Most CIOs come into these roles expecting to do grand things, invest big time, and so on and so forth. I didn't have that luxury. There was too much going on. There was no good news coming from anywhere in the world. The housing market in the US had crashed. And to make matters worse, I was a CTO before. So I was coming from a very precise environment to a very abstract environment. Coming from something that was very project-oriented to something that was more vision-oriented. There was really no good news at the time. And then suddenly, on the 15th of January, 2009, a miracle occurred. I was standing in my office on the 15th floor on 8th Avenue in New York City, looking out on the Hudson, and I could see a lot of boats moving around. I didn't know what was going on because we didn't have Twitter back then. But Captain Sully Sullenberger had just landed a plane on the Hudson with 115 people on board, and all of them survived. And you probably know from the introduction, I'm a big aviation enthusiast. So this was a big reference point for me. In fact, I was so impacted by it that I decided to split my career into two parts. One was before Sully and after Sully. My colleagues have an acronym for the first part. I won't say it here out loud. I even had the opportunity to meet Captain Sully in 2017, and I'll talk about that a little more later on. But what I really want to share with you today is the lessons I learned at this stage of my career and later on were very different. And one of the first ones is an anecdote from our founder, David Ogilvy. He was a famous copywriter, and the founder is often called the father of advertising. He was walking through Central Park when he saw a blind man with a sign that said, "I'm blind, please help." And everybody walked right past this guy. No one was giving him any money. Everybody ignored him. So he took a pen out of his pocket and he changed 2 words on it. And now the sign read, "It's spring, I'm blind, please help." He brought out the emotion of the moment and changed the whole aspect of that man's plight. And suddenly people started giving him some more money. And just like that, spring is just a great time of the year. It's getting warmer if you live in a cold country. Trees are green, birds are out, etc. He tapped into the emotion of his audience. And understanding your audience is a big part of all digital transformation. There are different aspects that you have to target for different things that you're doing. And because we've got some of the smartest people in the room here, I'm going to ask you for 1 minute to imagine you are the CEO of a technology company marketing a consumer-oriented microchip. What are the key words you would use in an ad for a microchip? You can shout it out. I would say speed, heat management, multi-threaded architectures. But I can tell you if I use those words, my grandmother won't be buying that microchip, right? So I'm going to show you a little 30-second ad of how to sell a microchip.
This summer, a dragon is coming.
Come on, you beast!
Stay together and we live!
No, a slightly smaller dragon. Tiny, really. But faster, way faster. And cuter, but not that cute. A dragon that's smarter, more advanced, can multitask, and doesn't waste power. This summer, a dragon is coming. Not to a theater, not to an enchanted little village. Nope, this dragon is coming to your phone. Well, technically, in your phone. Make sure your next phone has the blockbuster speed and performance hundreds of millions already love. Make sure it has a Snapdragon processor.
Will your grandmother buy that? Right? So there's a way of telling a story that makes it exciting, makes it palatable to the consumer, or your internal audience, or your organization where you're doing a digital transformation, right? So I did tell you that I met Captain Sully Sullenberger, and if you haven't seen this movie, The Miracle on the Hudson, try and watch it. It's an amazing movie, and I had this opportunity to meet Captain Sully, and being an aviation enthusiast, I was talking to him about how he landed the plane and so on and so forth. But none of that was as important as what he told me. He was at 2,800 feet outside the city of Manhattan after taking off from LaGuardia Airport when they hit a flock of birds. It lost both engines and most of their hydraulics. He had two choices: to try and go back to LaGuardia Airport and glide the aircraft back, or cross over into New Jersey, into Teterboro Airport on the other side. But he chose a third choice. He said he wouldn't make that distance and he would have to land on the water, on the Hudson River. Never before in the history of aviation has that ever occurred. And he had 2.5 minutes to do all of that. So while they were referencing manuals in the aircraft, he had to do one very important task. He had to tell his team in the back of the plane what was going on. And he had to think very carefully, and he picked up that mic and he picked 3 words. He said, brace for impact. And his team knew exactly what to do. They got everybody seated in a brace position in the safety of that flight, and they got them down all alive. If I transcend that to a digital transformation, what kind of discipline and focus do we apply to our scenarios in our own organizations? So I had a recent opportunity to work with about 80 finance and commercial people. And we did a 2-day design thinking session. First of all, I should get a prize for sitting with finance and commercial people for 2 days. But at the end of the work session, we came up with about 72 ideas to transform that team. Now, if you're going to start a digital transformation with 72 ideas, don't start, because there is no focus. If you succeed, it'll be mediocre at best. So we had to get this team to focus on about 10% of their ideas. And I'm just using some this is not the study, but something we would use in typical corporate speak. I got them to come down to about 8 ideas that they could pursue. This was still not good enough, because if I wanted them to be focused and disciplined on a few relevant topics, I needed them to use something even more different. And so I've always used the urgent important matrix from Stephen Covey. And in this scenario, I've had operational impact, customer impact, strategic impact, and idea incubator. Not that idea incubator is any less important. It's the constant flow of ideas that you capture from your younger generation in your organization and bring it through when you need it in the other quadrants. Now, if you take nothing away from this presentation, try and do this with your teams, and you see how they react. It's very difficult, because the operational people think theirs is the most urgent and important, and the strategy guys think the same thing. So coming to a conclusion and having that discipline and focus, so when you say brace for impact, they know exactly what they're doing. Are they building a new product? Are they being more competitive? Are they building a new line of revenue? Whatever it is, they're starting to get very focused. All change is part science and part sentiment. You believe that? We're very good with the numbers. We're very good with the spreadsheets. We're very good with the data points. But when it comes to the change and actually getting people on board with the change, it is much harder. And this is really all about awareness of organizational culture. What I found through my career, I've identified 4 types of organizations: reactive, adaptive, dynamic, and visionary. And it speaks for itself. Reactive are more about cost control. Adaptive are making changes as needed. The dynamic are looking on the horizon and adopting technologies that they need to compete with. And the visionary are complete game changers. They are disrupting the industry. Now you need good people to make the change happen. This here is a photograph of Franz Beckenbauer. He was the captain of the German soccer team. Amazing team. They went through many World Cups. The man is still winning awards. I've listed a few of his awards up here. He's still winning awards. And this I often talk about in the context of my own experiences growing up, of hiring captains, not kings or queens. When you hire kings or queens, they're in the corner office and they have subjects. They're giving orders. And when you have captains, they are participating with you. They adapt, they work with you, they engage, they lose with you, they win with you, they have your back. Very often, captains are very good at one thing, identifying things that are not real. Because in the technology space, as many of you may already know, is we go after the next bright, shiny thing, right? We start something and we suddenly realize that this is not working. And then you realize, these takeoffs of these new technologies, they're really optional. We don't have to if we haven't done the research on it. But the landing is mandatory. When you start something, finish it. I've been in organizations where, you see these projects go through because the technology sounds great. I remember when it was blockchain came out. People thought it was like a Netflix account. Everybody needed to have one, right? You realize quickly that that's not the scene. That's very different. It's going to be something much bigger and a very different kind of take on tech. And I've learned 6 key lessons in projects like this. The first one is unbound enthusiasm. Next is total disillusionment. Third is panic, a frantic search for the guilty, punishment of the innocent, and a promotion of the uninvolved. Right? Thank you. So if you're going to start something, finish it. Once more? Okay. Unbound enthusiasm, total disillusionment, panic, a frantic search for the guilty, the punishment of the innocent, and the promotion of the uninvolved. You don't have to applaud again. It's okay. Well, now, not every project takes that route. Sometimes things happen. There are unintended consequences of even the best ideas. And so I want to share with you a personal story. This here is a photograph of me and my 2 sons. We hiked in the mountains of New Mexico for 10 nights and 11 days, right? So for those of you who know me, I grew up, until the age of about 8 or 9 years old, I grew up on the outskirts of Mumbai in a little fishing village. And I lived in a house that was about 100 square feet with my grandmother, my parents, 4 siblings, and a dog that we adopted from the street. We had no running water, we had no phones, and the bathrooms were 50 feet away from the house. And I always said I'd work hard to get away from that situation. And then my kids go and join the Boy Scouts. And you know what Boy Scouts do? Every year they go on these crazy hikes in the mountains for 10 days and 11 days. And guess what? The tent I stay in is 6 by 5, shared with some other guy. There's no running water. There's no electricity. There's no phone. And there are no bathrooms. And I pay to do that. So I call it unintended consequences, right? I really enjoy the trip with my kids. But it's just amazing that as with life, things happen in our transformation efforts that are unplanned. And plans change, structures change. I've worked with some great people, very enthusiastic about their transformation initiatives, and they themselves are impacted negatively by it. And it was Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th President of the United States and a general in the Second World War, who said it best. And I paraphrase. He says, "When going into battle, I find that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." Something to learn from these people, right? So that said, I want to talk a little bit about innovation very quickly. How do you create a culture of innovation? Very often we have great ideas that never come to fruition because we're so busy doing busy work or day jobs, right? And even though you've got great ideas, nobody knows how to translate them to actionable deliverables. I asked 4 questions. Here they are. Will it positively impact the CEO's strategy? 2, is it a game changer? What is the time from incubator to market? I was recently at MIT, and when we were talking about this, and I met a company that was working on alloys and metal, and they have an incubation time of 18 years. We don't have that luxury in our world of technology, right? We don't have that luxury. We probably have 3-6 months at the best case. And the final question I ask is it operational? If it is operational, it is continuous improvement. Sorry. It's gone, never mind. If it's operational, it's continuous improvement. You don't need to make it an innovation project. You don't need to put it into your idea bank as an innovation prospect. But what works against innovation? I think the first thing is our inability to say no. If you listen to what Steve Jobs said at the 1997 Developer Conference, he said, innovation is saying no to 1,000 things, right? Then it's the paralysis of analysis. You want to stop innovation in its tracks, give it to a number cruncher. He'll tell you 15 reasons why you shouldn't be doing something, right? And the third is a lack of method and controlled failure. And the reason I use this as an example is we're not all Google. We don't have the luxury of saying 20% of our employees' times can be given to doing something that you like. So you have to have controlled failure. You have to have method. You have to have cadence so that it is not a never-ending story. And in my experience, I've found that almost every transformation is a digital transformation. Almost every transformation. And the reason I use this example is I was called recently in to solve a business challenge on working capital. That's a very financially oriented solution. What we found was that it was inefficiency in the process, and robotic automation could solve it. RPA could solve it, right? And I write about this in my book because when I went through the process, and I also interviewed somebody from GE on this, I have 7 steps to succeed in a robotic process automation project, and none of them are technology related. So we can use automation anywhere, UiPath, you name it, the technology works. But getting people on board, as soon as you say robotics, it's a fear, there's a certain scariness to that level of automation. So why do we have to tell better stories to convince people to do these things? The reason is we are moving to very mature technology stacks. We are going from what we call social, mobile, analytics, and cloud, which were already quite difficult 10 years ago to explain cloud to somebody, to what one of the big 4 consulting firms calls the dark stack, right? Distributed ledger, artificial intelligence, extended reality, and quantum computing. If we cannot convince people why they need to invest in these tools when you get to that point in your transformation, you will not succeed at getting the investment that you desire. You will not succeed in getting that venture capitalist to make that move. And so I'm going to give you one last example on an area that I like very much, on extended reality. Extended reality is very hard to explain to the layperson, just like with the microchip. But I'm going to take something that I like, aviation, and explain it to you. So I was flying into New Jersey, Newark Airport recently on a 737. I was the pilot. And there were strong winds buffering the aircraft. I was completely the wrong angle of descent. I had 150 passengers on board. I didn't think I could make the runway. I finally managed to touch down. I bounced once, kept going. I didn't know what to do at that point. I forgot to put on seatbelt signs. My phone signal picked up, and I started to receive text messages because we were on the ground. And I was sure we were going to overshoot the runway. So at that point, I just said, stop. I took a sip of my coffee. The coffee was real. The simulation wasn't. I was sitting there with my headset, in a pilot's seat, actually feeling the aircraft like a real pilot would. It was completely virtual. And I do it with a 747 sitting in a cockpit, and I can see everything that a real pilot would see. Now imagine doing this for a person in a wheelchair who has never seen the Great Barrier Reef, or somebody who wants to be on the soccer field with Messi, or somebody who wants to be underwater in a pool somewhere, cannot swim. There are so many opportunities to do it. And that's how I would explain extended reality, right? And I'll leave you with one last question on innovation. And it is, what do you do personally to enable a culture of innovation in your own teams? And I don't mean the website. I don't mean the corporate mantra in your policy handbooks. What do you do personally? And I asked a group of CEOs recently, I had about 100 CEOs from Fortune 2000 companies, and I asked this question. It was a very informal, non-scientific survey. 70% of them said they had no formal method of brokering innovation within their teams. 20% had some idea, but no real plan. Only 7% had a real plan. This is important because 90% of our target audience that we have to sell these ideas to are not in a shape to receive that information because they're hearing it more from the buzzword standpoint. AI, I hear everything about AI, right? Ask somebody to explain it to you. Tell a story about how to make it real. It's really hard to do, but that's the target audience, the CEO, the COO. That was the audience I was talking to. It was very difficult to fathom that they didn't have that sense of innovation. And I'll end with a quote from a person that I know who is the Chief Innovation Officer of GE Healthcare. And she says, very simply, the pace of change today is the slowest it will ever be. Everything from this point on is going to be faster. With that, I want to thank you for paying attention to my presentation. Apparently, we have time for questions. I didn't think we did. Yeah. 2 questions.
2 questions, audience. Hands up, please. We'll get the mic over to you. Yes, there's one there.
Yuri, excellent talk. Thank you so much. I had the opportunity to work with Ogilvy teams in Dubai before.
Excellent.
Amazing experiences. I brought in a lot of expectations. You surpassed them all today. Thank you so much. I see you have a very splendid view of the world. Can you recount a couple of instances for us in your life that made the person you are now?
Well, I talked about captains and kings, right? So I had the good fortune of having a mentor by the name of R. Sridhar. When I was a boy with mismatched socks and 1 pair of pants, he took me on under his wing and he trained me for 5 years. He said, there's no need to do an MBA, you just work with me. And he really brought me along. He would put me in front of senior people who visited our offices. He would give me an opportunity to make presentations and fail. He would give me an opportunity to do things that I never thought possible. He would even send me for yoga classes because I used to get stressed speaking publicly. So he said, this is a way to relax. There's something called there was a breathing method he was teaching me. So that was a great, I think that's why I focus so much on the captains and kings bit. And every time I hire somebody in my group, I make sure there's a chemistry, right? I follow that on and I pay it forward. And I want to make sure the people coming onto my team have the same mentality. Because it's not about sitting in the corner office, it's about rolling your sleeves up and converting the strategy to execution, right? I hope that answers your question. We got one more question. I think we've answered all the questions. All right, thank you.
It's the